The world is a reflection of who we are. We tend to fix things out there instead of looking in here. And that applies to our personal lives as well to business. And let me share a personal story with you, which set the foundation of my current work. 12 years ago, I had an accident. I was run over by a snowboarder. I couldn't move my legs anymore. And I couldn't bear light and sound. At that time, I spent a lot of time alone, and questions popped up in my mind. Like, who am I? And what am I really here for? As a recovery, I was a lot out there in nature. And somehow I realized that I had lost something which used to be so important to me back then as I was a little kid. I used to spend a lot of time in nature with animals, and I donated money to organizations who protected the environment and were taking care of animals. And somehow I realized by growing up that I had lost something. A care for something outside of me. And instead of that, I was running behind a carrot stick because I was concerned about going to the right university, having a right job, and then living in the right neighborhood. It made me think, did I really lose the connection with nature? Or did I lose the connection with my inner nature? And therefore, outer nature. Well, I was thinking how this all applies to what is going on around in the world and in business. And what I notice, there are business models who are not living up and not in harmony with their environment. They do not respect natural resources, the people at the bottom of the value chain, or their own consumers. Most companies still produce in a linear way. They extract materials, they produce, make a profit, and then they dump the product. And that creates a lot of waste. Second, we lack a leadership. A lot of leaders face a world which is complex and uncertain, and business need to transform. Almost all sectors in transition, and that is not the exception, it is the norm. So, do we have leaders who know where to go, which really have a vision, which is bold? And, well, they lack principles and norms in order to get there. And do they really take care about the results they get? Well, thirdly, we see an approach of a survival of the fittest. We need to compete in order to stay in business. We need to be better than all this. We need to beat others in order to stay ahead of the game. And not only do business compete, but as individuals, we do compete with our colleagues because, well, who is moving up the career ladder within a corporate the fastest, right? Well, looking at all these challenges and the complex world we live in, I think we need a different approach. We need to collaborate and find other solutions. And I think we need a non-predatory approach to change. A non-predatory approach of change, which is based on trust, respect, transparency, and inclusion. And let me share another story with you, how I came to this idea. As I was recovering from my accident, I spent a lot of time in nature. And once I saw a semi-wild herd of horses. First of all, I just wanted to watch them. But then something in me thought, I wanted to get closer to them. So I moved up to them, and somehow they noticed me, and they got closer to me. And it was really interesting because there was a dance, me moving closer, they moving closer, up to the point that the herd stopped 4 meters from me, and that the leader of the herd stepped forward. I was a bit scared. Could they attack me? And would I be safe? I closed my eyes. And I really said, I surrender. I will not do any harm. As I opened my eyes, as a surprise, the horse stood in front of me and had put her head on my chest. We stood there for a while, and then all the herd members came one by one and greeted me as part of the herd. At that time, I thought, this is special. Let's explore more of this. Well, now I use horses within my practice. So what can we learn from herds? Well, it's interesting if we look at how horses have been survived over millions of years. They have been really successful in doing so. And if you think, they have done so without a strategy. They are prey in a herd animal, and they live in an environment where they don't protect the territory. They don't say, this is mine and this is yours. They live in harmony together. And they don't have a speech. They communicate with the body. So if something happens in the environment, they become alert and sense what's going on. So if there's a wolf, the stress level goes up. Well, if it's a wolf with youngsters, you see the stress level goes down and the herd keeps on grazing. Well, if it's a herd, or if it's a wolf who's hungry, you can see the herd getting more excited. They wait until one horse signals to run, and then the whole herd will run as one. Well, think about it. If something happens to organization, to your organization, do you run as one? Or are you all scattered out and try to fix things individually? Let's have a closer look at what herds can teach organizations. There are various characteristics, but let's look at 3. The leadership, roles, and hierarchy. If you look at leadership within a herd, it's interesting that it's not self-determined. No. The leadership is given to the horse who's the most servant, the most observant, and the most trustworthy. So it's not about the strength, about the big or the tallness, and about age. Well, then it's also interesting. They have 2 leaders, a mare and a stallion who are leading the herd. And together they take decisions. So let's look at it. If you look at the mare, she's leading from the front, and she's the one who brings the horses, the herd, to food and shelter. And not only is she producing youngsters, she's taking care of the culture of the herd. A culture of we. And where there is too much individualistic behavior, the horse will be corrected. And if the horse will not adjust its behavior, it will be kicked out. Because it is a threat for the survival of the herd. So just think, what kind of leaders do we appoint in business? And what are their characteristics? Well, then we have the stallion, and he's leading from behind. So he's the one who keeps the group together, and if there's any danger, who puts himself between the herd and the danger. And he's the one who keeps the pace of the group, of the herd. And he makes sure that he will do so in a way that even the young and the oldest move in a way that all stay vital and healthy. They move on 80% of their capacity because if something happens, they need to be flexible and they need to have the resources to respond to unforeseen things. So just think, how does an organization is performing? Your organization, is it performing on 80% of its capacity, on 100, or on 120? And then, how flexible are you to respond to things out there? Well, horses, as I said, have clear roles. So they don't have a horse who's taking all decisions in all instances. No, they have a situational leadership. So in one instance, a horse will take a decision, and in another, you will see the horses fill in. So, for example, if there's a new horse joining the herd, well, one mare will take care of the socialization. But at the same time, if a foal has a youngster and she needs to eat, you will see that naturally mares will come and babysit. So finally, horses have a hierarchy, and they are fine with it. Because, well, it makes them survive. They trust on the one who stays above them. And if a new horse enters the herd, well, then you got stress, and then you got trouble. Well, the same is true, actually, if we look in organizations where we see that accountability and responsibility are not aligned. Or where there is a strong informal network next to the formal network. Stress levels go up, and people don't know what to do. So, what can horses teach us for leadership? Well, we can use horses to develop a natural leadership. And what is natural leadership? Well, natural leadership is something we can all be and can learn to develop. It's not bound to a position or a role. It's a state and a process. So, as a natural leader, you can tap into your true potential and get the results you aim for. Well, you might say, that sounds really easy. How does that work out? Well, you might all be familiar with just first looking at behavior, and behavior makes up results. So have a closer look at the iceberg. The top of the iceberg says, well, we have skills, we have attitudes, we have knowledge, skills, and attitude, which makes up behavior. Well, then we have the invisible part of the iceberg. The way we think, the way we feel, our assumptions, and our needs. And that invisible part will define more than 80% if you're effective in what you're doing and if you will get the performance you aim for. So, how can we deal with that invisible part of the iceberg? Well, it starts by being more true to yourself. And being more true to yourself means in every single situation, do you trust what is going on within you? Well, that's easy, you might say. Well, but do you respect what you're feeling? And do you really act upon it? Do you communicate what you need? And finally, will you do so in the right energy? Well, how does this all work out with horses? And how can we learn to move beyond the invisible part of the iceberg and learn to tap into our true potential, therefore show the effective behavior and get the results we aim for? If you start to work with a horse and we work on a challenge, like, well, you have a boss and he's quite dominant and he's not really interested in what you have to say. Or you feel that you have to do a lot in order to make him listen to your ideas and that he really take them into account. You will find a horse who is really pushy. If your challenge is that your people in your team are not taking responsibility, not taking enough ownership, you might end up working with a horse who's not moving at all. And finally, if your question is, or your challenge is, I am leading a change initiative. I have been really successful in doing so. And I don't know what happened, but suddenly it stopped. You will come to see that within the interaction with the horse will start doing it, and suddenly it will stop. Well, now you might think, well, people who don't know or are not familiar with horses can do a better job than people who know horses. Well, actually, horse lovers have a more difficult task in getting the results they aim for. And why? On a daily basis, they know how to treat a horse. They have the knowledge, the skills, and the attitude to do so. But the moment they start to work with a challenge, with a question, the interaction with a horse will be defined by the invisible part of the iceberg. And then it is up to us, and within seconds, we can really make a difference. If we learn how to be true to ourselves, look inward, and within 3 steps, we can make a difference. Step 1 is understanding your limiting model. What is your pattern? So, what is the way of thinking and feeling which creates this result? Step 2 is breaking with the old, understanding who you really are, and creating new results. Well, so you practice new behavior, you get a different mindset, and then at a sudden, hey, guess what? You get different results. And in the 3rd step, you will anchor that new learned behavior. And you will come to see that then, somehow, it's not willpower anymore. You don't need to effort. It will go with ease, and you will get your results in flow. Well, thirdly, we can bring in the invisible part of the invisible horse into the company. Organizations who have been working with horses come to understand what the underlying pattern is, which make up if they have a clear direction or not, how they communicate and collaborate with each other. And they start to have a language in which they are able to give feedback and don't accept if anybody is not taking responsibility for their performance and is using all kinds of perfect reasons. It starts by listening to people. It starts by seeing people, by engaging people. engaging them in the process instead of forcing top-down decisions upon them. And what you will come to see, if people learn to be really true to themselves and dare to speak up, that the motivation will go up, that they are more committed, and that they will go for an extra mile. So, what does this all mean if we could look for business? Well, business needs a clear vision, a North Star on where to go, to act in harmony with their environment, have business models which are cyclic. We need a new leadership, leaders who dare to take ownership for the results we get. Leaders who dare to be vulnerable, to show what is really going on. Leaders who have principles and work on the basis of trust, respect, transparency, and inclusion. And finally, we need to engage people within the change initiative. People like to contribute in what is happening if you dare to let go and empower them and ask your opinion. So we can all be a natural leader. We can change situations. We can get the results we aim for if we stop looking out there and start looking in here. Thank you.